What we were finding at the time was that there was all this misinformation. There would be random attacks from PETA and other animal rights organizations, and we were finding so much of what was being said to be untrue, but we had no way to prove it, right? It was just our word. And so what this did is really enabled us to develop something that was, truly third party, audited by a different body than the standard holder, to really kind of outline and show that there isn't, animal cruelty going on, at least not when it's done properly. And so I think it gives the brands, it gives the consumers a level of comfort, besides for the comfort of the products, but a level of comfort in the materials, that it's not coming from any source of animal cruelty or anything negative like that.
Hello and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. The Outdoor Minimalist podcast has the goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. In episode 136 of the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, we are tackling the highly requested topic of down insulation. And if you remember back in episode 101, we spoke with Mike Somberby from the brand Duckworth about how ethical and sustainable wool production actually is. And today we're going to take a similar approach to learn about down insulation. And as a note to all of our vegan listeners, be ready for what you learn because it just might surprise you. To help me uncover the ethics and sustainability of down insulation production and use, I sat down to chat with Daniel Uretsky. After earning his law degree from Georgetown and working 4 years as a litigator, Daniel returned to join his family business in 2010 as General Counsel. In his years at Allied, Daniel's business savvy and socially conscious leadership has helped Allied expand its already prestigious partner base, which now reads as a veritable who's who in the outdoor and home fashion industries. And now, as president, he has piloted a wide range of environmental impact efforts and advocated for animal welfare initiatives in-house and across the industry, even spearheading what has become the industry's largest animal welfare standards like the Responsible Down Standard, RDS, and the Traceable Down Standard, TDS. Thanks for joining me on the Outdoor Minimalist podcast today, Daniel. The topic of down materials has been a highly requested topic for this show, so I think the listeners will be excited that I was able to connect with an expert like you. So I guess since we are an outdoor industry focused brand, I usually start with the question of how did you get interested in outdoor recreation and how does it fit into your life now?
So yeah, it's interesting. I think I've developed more and more of an appreciation for it, honestly, over the years of working in this industry and working it down. I think, I grew up in Los Angeles. And I think nowadays there's definitely much more of an emphasis on getting outdoors and doing things like that. But like growing up, I would say it wasn't necessarily like at the forefront of the conversations, especially in LA. Yeah, we'd go to the beach and this and that, but, didn't do a lot of, I guess, outdoor activities. And I would say the last 15 years or so being in the industry, kind of meeting with different, people and companies that specialize in this. It's really, I guess, opened up an awareness and just an enjoyment for it. So I love, my favorite thing to do is to ski. So I guess that's my favorite outdoor activity. But hiking, doing some, camping, not as often as I'd like to, but just getting outside. I love it. I mean, started running the last couple of years, which is great, and doing trail runs and stuff like that. And so just whenever I go to a new city for travel or this or that, I always try to make a point of having, at least half a day to explore, whatever outdoors are available to me there. And so it's definitely become a part of my working career, which is a really nice little feature.
That's awesome. And are you no longer based in Los Angeles then? Or where are
Oh
you
no,
based out of?
still based in LA.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that's where I live, and our headquarters are just outside of downtown LA. So we have a factory here, which was where the company was founded. We also have factories in China, Vietnam, Canada, and the Czech Republic, and then we have one on the East Coast as well in North Carolina. But yeah, still based in LA, and but I do travel a lot for work, so it's nice to be able to see other places as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you have the opportunity to go and visit those places often. And so speaking of your company, so Allied Feather, is that the proper name for it?
Well, it's Allied Feather and Down, but
Oh,
yeah,
okay. Allied
in
Feather and
short,
down.
yeah, in short, we always say, oh, I'm calling from Allied Feather. It's just, I don't know why the name like Allied Down never took. I don't know. It just maybe just
Oh,
doesn't roll as well. Allied Feather just sounds a little bit easier to say. But yeah, Allied Feather and Down is the full name.
okay. So do you mind explaining what Allied Feather and Down is, and what your background working with down materials specifically is?
For sure. So Allied Feather and Down primarily is a down and feather processor, right? So what that means is down is a byproduct of the food industry. So we're not actually raising birds, down comes from waterfowl, so ducks or geese that are farmed for the food, that are, for the meat industry. And then we're buying the byproduct. We're buying the down and feather that gets removed from them. We process it. So when it comes off the bird, after they're slaughtered for the meat, it's kind of all just a big mess of feathers and down together. It's not really, obviously usable. It has to be separated and cleaned and things like that because the feathers, which is most of what covers the bird, are these two-dimensional flat, kind of has the spine in the middle. It's good for structure in some things, some of the smaller feathers used in cushions for sofas and things like that. But for the outdoor industry, what's really used primarily is the down. The down is the three-dimensional, the fluffy stuff, what gives you the loft in the jackets and things like that. And so that has to be separated out from the feathers. It has to be processed and cleaned really well. Obviously, to make sure that it's you remove any kind of natural bacteria and things like that, being that it's a natural product. So yeah, we are a processor and selling that. I would say about 12, 13 years ago, we started a second part of the company where we actually make bedding products. So that part of the company is now called Allied Home. We make pillows, blankets, comforters, mattress pads, things like that for the home industry, for hotels and home, I would say. But on the down and feather side, we don't make jackets or anything like that. We just process the feather and down and then sell it to factories making jackets for the brands.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. And was there a specific, I guess, catalyst or something that drew you to working with this specific material?
Yeah, I guess the catalyst was fate, I guess, in a sense, right? My background is in law, so I went to law school, worked as a lawyer for 4 years. I went to school back on the East Coast at Georgetown and worked as an attorney for 2 years in Nevada and Las Vegas, and then 2 years here in Los Angeles. My father had started this company back in 1987, so I grew up around it, would work here in the summers and things like that. And while at the time I didn't know that much about the supply chain or the real details, but I kind of, grew up around the business and always understood it on a certain basic level. And so I would say after a couple of years of practicing law, it was 2009-ish. The economy was in the Great Recession, and my legal work as kind of a young attorney at the firm that I was at, we were doing litigation, ended up being a lot of like almost collections type work, which I really just didn't enjoy and wasn't kind of what I thought I had signed up for. At the same time, my father was looking to expand the business, and so wanted a little bit of help, and so it just kind of worked out. That at the same time, I was kind of starting to look for something else. He was looking for somebody else, and so joined him, and that's kind of how I ended up in the business. And I would say within a couple of years really took an affinity to it. I just really enjoy what I do, have an appreciation for it. I always say, when I was a lawyer, I would work on different projects and this and that, but I always felt like I wasn't necessarily adding to anything. I was, maybe trying to, at best, problem solve a little bit. But at the end of the day, when you're using lawyers, the only ones that win are the lawyers. Whereas nowadays, doing what I do, I could walk around any, cold city, in the world and see jackets from partners that we've supplied and know that like, okay, at least I did something, that helped get our down into that jacket and keeping people warm. And, it's a lot nicer to be able to see that kind of thing out and about, and feel like you're actually producing something positive and feel like you're actually doing something good and helping people in some way.
Yeah, perhaps it's a bit more tangible, the work now. And so you mentioned a couple of applications, so like the jackets, and also in some home goods. But are there specific like product sets that down is used more widely in?
Um, yeah, obviously. So jackets, right, and sleeping bags, jackets, vests, I would say, right, sleeping bags. Then there's other kind of like ancillary products. Some companies make down pants and things like that for obviously like the high altitude kind of like Himalayan suits, so to speak, that people will wear to go to like Everest and places like that, like full down suits, but that's obvious, that's not as common. But yeah, I would say in the outdoor kind of apparel side, primarily jackets and vests, and sleeping bags. And then on the home side, yeah, pillows, comforters, blankets is really where down is used the most. I mean, I think over the years, um, there's been just a little bit more of a movement towards, lower priced materials, synthetics, things like that in general in the bedding market. But there still is a ton of down used in that market as well, in the home market.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason I forget that it is used a lot in the home market, probably because I'm hyper focused on the outdoor industry. But
Yeah.
what are some of the benefits, I guess, of using down as an insulating material?
So it's really a wonderful insulation in that down is extremely light, obviously, right? And so the main benefit of down, we always say, is the warmth to weight, right? So it's the amount of warmth you can achieve with a really little amount of weight. And then the higher quality of down that you use, right? Down is measured by something called fill power, which is a measurement of volume, which is essentially within a given weight, the amount of space that down takes up, the amount of space that down fills, which basically the way it works is down, like I said, is these three-dimensional spherical plumes that have these little tendril-like things radiating out from it, filaments, and they kind of lock in with each other to trap your body's heat, essentially. And so with a really little amount of weight, the insulation is using your own body heat to keep you warm. And so from that standpoint, it's extremely efficient. It can be extremely light and extremely warm, but it also breathes, which is quite nice. It's very durable. Down, if taken care of, can last an extremely long time. It's biodegradable, so it doesn't end up in our landfills or in our waterways or anything like that. So from a sustainability standpoint and insulation standpoint, it's really a wonderful material.
I know that there are several like outdoor industry brands and suppliers that produce synthetic insulation. So, like if we're comparing the two, I don't want to say like which one performs better, but like what are some of the primary differences I guess people might notice?
Sure. So what's interesting is if you look at a lot of the marketing, I would say, for the synthetic, from the synthetic industry and the marketing materials, and they do a great job. And there are some really nice synthetics, but it's always as warm as down, as light as down, as fluffy. It's always comparing to down, which kind of gives you tells you that down is kind of like the pinnacle product. I would say one of the advantages of synthetics over down is in certain environments that are very wet. Synthetic could be a better alternative to down, where you're using it just in a very wet environment. There are kind of innovations in down over the last 10 years or so, water resistant down. There's a new innovation that we have that we can get into a little bit later called Expedry that help down perform extremely well in wet conditions. But that's what I would say the advantage of synthetic could be. The other advantage, honestly, is price. Down is somewhat of a commodity. I mean, we don't treat it that way, but it's based on supply and demand. And like I said, it's a byproduct. So the supply follows the meat industry and is kind of not at all tethered to the demand side of things, which is kind of interesting, right? So the birds are raised based on the demand for the meat. And so when people are eating more geese and ducks, there will be more down and feathers. When people are eating less geese and ducks, there'll be less. But on the demand side of things, you have companies making jackets, sleeping bags, pillows, comforters, which has nothing to do with the supply side of things. So it makes it a little bit difficult in that regard from a pricing standpoint, because those two things are not correlated. So when there's an extremely cold winter, or down is, let's say, in fashion, so to speak, and more companies are using it, then that'll put pressure on the demand side. But it's not like the farmers are going to say, oh, more people want down, let's raise more geese and ducks. It doesn't really work that way. So that would, that creates sometimes price challenges. Not always. It's a fluid market and it's cyclical. So sometimes prices are high, sometimes they're low. Right now happen to be extremely high. But that would be the other disadvantage of down, I would say, is just the pricing of it, versus synthetics, which can be made from, petroleum-based products and recycled from plastic bottles and things like that. And so that price-wise, there's somewhat of an advantage there.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Like the correlation with the meat market and kind of that productions. And so would you mind breaking down how the down as a material then is collected through that process and then made into what people know it as, insulation?
For sure. So yeah, it's interesting. So the birds are raised, like I said, on farms generally for the meat. They're actually quite nice. I think that sometimes the picture people get in their heads of farms, for poultry are not always so pretty. But I've gone to many farms over my last 15-year career or so, throughout Eastern Europe, China, and all Canada, the US. I've gone kind of all over the place, and they generally are very open, large open spaces. And the birds are raised, like I said, and depending on the region, depending on the demand for the meat, anywhere from ducks can be kind of 6 to 10 weeks or so. Geese are usually raised longer, probably 10 to 16 weeks or so generally. And then when they're large enough, or whatever the case may be, they're taken to the slaughterhouse. They're slaughtered for the meat. The down and feather is removed mechanically and then kind of washed off to the side to be sterilized. So they get sterilized first. We get it from that point. Then, like I said, it has to be separated. So the feather and down has to be separated, because when it comes off, it's all just a big jumble. And maybe from the average bird, you're getting 15 to 20% of down in that mixture. Whereas when you make a jacket, right, what's used as insulation is usually anywhere from 75% down, 25% feather, up to 90% down, 10% feather. So there's these large sorting machines basically that go by gravity, and it's really cool to see. But basically the heaviest material, which is the feathers, tend to fall to the bottom of the first chamber, and then the down kind of floats into the second chamber, and then you have multiple chambers doing that. So kind of at the end of that process, you're left with not 100% down, but a lot purer down. And then from there, we can blend depending on what the customer needs and demands are. So we can make it an 80-20, an 85-15, an 90-10, depending on what the customer specs are. And so, after it's sorted and separated, we wash it, obviously. It's an important part of the process. You wouldn't want to use down straight out of the slaughterhouse. It would be pretty gross. So we put it through an extensive wash process. We call our DuraWash process, which is, over the years, I think, become kind of the gold standard for cleaning down. Our down has been rated not only hypoallergenic based on the cleanliness, but actually allergen free, which is interesting because a lot of people you speak to, or some people you speak to, have a kind of perceived down allergy. They say, I can't sleep on a down pillow, I have allergies. Almost always, not 100% of the time, but 99 point whatever percent of the time, they're allergic to the organic matter that's found in the down. They're not allergic to the down itself. Down is composed of keratin, which is a protein like our hair. So it's not a dander or a fur or anything like that. It's a protein based. And so the allergies are almost always to the other things that can get in. And so by cleaning it extremely well, we can get rid of those impurities and just be left with the down. And even that is a very not tricky thing, but it's a science in that if you over process the down and over clean it, you can make it dry and brittle, and then it won't be fluffy and it'll start to break apart, right? So if you have a jacket and that doesn't have good down in it, and you compress it, take it out, shake it out, use it, compress it again, go on a trip, stuff it in your stuff sack, whatever the case may be, that brittle down that's dry will start to break apart. And you'll end up with just fibers and it won't insulate very well. And so part of the magic, I guess, in processing the down is making sure it's extremely clean, but that you're leaving some of those natural oils and things in there. So it does have that resiliency, that fluffiness, and will continue to kind of keep you warm. The other thing that it does is it makes it somewhat water repellent, right? Because down is from waterfowl. So naturally, ducks and geese live on the water. So there is somewhat of a little bit of a natural water repellency to it.
Yeah, that's really interesting about the cleaning process. I mean, it makes sense, but I didn't consider the allergen aspect. That's fascinating. And I mean, in order to clean the materials to that capacity, I'm assuming you're using a lot of water sometimes. So would you say that maybe that's the area that down has the biggest environmental impact, is the amount of water it takes to process, or are there other things that have a bigger impact?
I guess potentially it could be. We here at Allied, in the US, based on our production, we recycle 80% of our water. So we have a holding tank. It goes through, like you said, multiple wash processes. But what we do is once the beginning few kind of rinses are obviously a lot more dirty than the last few. So what we do is we take the last few and kind of recycle that water through a holding tank and then use that for the first few rinses of the next batch. So we recycle about 80% of our water here in the States. In China, it's actually 100%. We have a full water treatment facility in our China factory. And so, it's almost no new water usage. It's 100% recycled. And so, yeah, it could be a water intensive process, but we do our best to minimize that. Also, from an energy standpoint, there's obviously energy being used through the machinery, through the washing machine and the dryer. The dryer would be the kind of highest point of energy usage, but even that's not very long because, like I said, you don't want to over dry it because you'll ruin it, right? So we're very careful to kind of walk that line and minimize energy usage when we can. And then again, like I said, this new innovation that we've come up with, the Expa-Dry, that we'll get into soon, but that helps to minimize actually water usage in the treatment and energy usage in the curing process and drying.
Okay, interesting. Adventuring plans on your calendar? Remember to grab your Lava Linens travel towel on your way out the door. Founded by a mother-daughter team, Lava Linens crafts durable, luxurious travel towels as a more sustainable and better performing alternative to microfiber and cotton towels. Powered by flax, hemp, and tencel, they're designed to be by your side for years to come. Use the code Outdoor Minimalist for 15% off your next order. Yeah, so I guess, do you want to go into maybe some of the ethics of down, or do you want to talk about the Expa-Dry maybe first?
We can talk about we can talk about the ethics of down. I think is a good, kind of way to get into that, and then we could talk about the technology afterwards. I think because it's kind of an add-on, right? So
yeah, sure. Okay, so many listeners may be familiar with something called the Responsible Down Standard, or RDS. Like when you're shopping online, a lot of brands will have that in the product descriptions. So do you mind overviewing what the RDS, or Responsible Down Standard, is?
For sure. So the Responsible Down Standard is an animal welfare standard that looks after, so to speak, the birds from the time that they're hatched all the way through the jacket, really. And so, which at that point, they're not birds anymore, but it really, it is the most comprehensive standard kind of available. It was a standard that we actually helped to found back in 2013. We worked with the North Face to pilot this program and to develop it. We went through our supply chains. Like I said, that was when I did the bulk of my supply chain touring. I've done it before and I've done it since, but that was kind of like a year spent doing a lot of that work, going through Eastern Europe. We went into Hungary and Ukraine and Romania and places like that. And then we went through China as well, through a lot of different supply chains there, looking at the farms, talking to the farmers, talking to the slaughterhouses, and really mapping out the supply chains, mapping out the way that things are done and collected. We did it together also with Control Union, which is an auditor. We developed the standard based on what we found, and then not only us, but at the point that we kind of mapped everything out, we brought it to the industry more widely. So back in the day, there was the outdoor retailer shows that were much bigger than they are now. And there were these working groups that would meet before. And so we, every show had a down working group that took, a really, that had a lot of discussion really around this topic. So developed the standard together. And then once the standard was developed, it was given over to the textile exchange to own and really be a true third-party standard, right? I mean, what we were finding at the time was that there was all this misinformation. There would be random attacks from PETA and other animal rights organizations. And we were finding so much of what was being said to be untrue, but we had no way to prove it, right? It was just our word. And so what this did is really enabled us to develop something that was, truly third party, audited by a different body than the standard holder, to really kind of outline and show that there isn't, animal cruelty going on, at least not when it's done properly. And so I think it gives the brands, it gives the consumers a level of comfort, besides for the comfort of the products, but a level of comfort in the materials, that it's not coming from any source of animal cruelty or anything negative like that. And so, yeah, it's really become kind of the standard now in the industry, something we're very proud of, that having, been able to work on back then. And it's something that I would say that's where kind of I used the most of my legal background in this job, was as we were developing that and kind of reading the fine print and things like that. And it was helpful to have a little bit of that background for sure. But it's something that's, like you said, used everywhere now. And we hope that the consumers recognize that and can see that as something. And we've developed something alongside of it called Track My Down, which is a proprietary internal program that we have, which basically every lot of down that we process comes with a unique lot number that our customer can put on a hang tag with the QR code or with the lot number itself, and given to the consumer, where they can go on the website, trackmydown.com, look up the information on the down, where that actual lot of down came from, the quality specs of it, how it tested, and then a whole bunch of educational information on it. And so the goal is really to show it's not only, a certification and a stamp, like everything's okay, like here's what it actually means, here's why it's important, here's how things are done right.
Yeah, I love that level of transparency. That's something that we talk a lot about on the show, of like how to identify brands and materials that like are actually sustainable and ethical. And a lot of it has to do with just like how transparent, how much information is being communicated and how easy it is to access. So I love that Track My Down option.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, and I think, you just hit it on the head also. I think it's such an important distinction, right? Because there's responsibility and sustainability, right? So, or there's the ethical side of it and the sustainable side of it, right? So from a sustainability side, down is really the most sustainable insulation, in my opinion, that you can have, in the sense that the way that it's processed and collected, and the fact that it's a byproduct, right? And we always have this discussion with brands that are talking to some of the animal rights organizations, and they're like trying to pressure the brands to not use down. And what we always come back to is, you could stop using down. It wouldn't make there be any less down in the world, right? You would just not be using it. And what would you be using instead? You'd be using petroleum-based synthetic, or even something that's recycled. where the energy intensive and chemical intensiveness of that process is so much higher than down. Even the detergent that we use in the wash process that I discussed before, it's essentially like an industrial strength shampoo, basically, because again, you can't use harsh chemicals or bleaches or anything like that on the down because it'll ruin it and make it brittle. So it's really the detergents that we use are safe for the environment. We have something called Blue Sign certification, which is a different third-party certification that governs environmental health and safety. We're also Okotex certified, which looks at the chemical usage and the environmental impact. And so, from a sustainability standpoint, in my opinion, there's nothing really better than down because it's a byproduct. And then from an ethical standpoint, that's kind of the other side of things, right? And we hear that from brands like, oh, we want to stop using down because a sustainability. Like, okay, so you mean ethical, not sustainable. It's important to distinguish between those two things. From an ethical standpoint, that was why it was so important for us to have this RDS, the Responsible Down Standard, and our Track My Down system to really give consumers and brands that level of comfort that not only is it sustainable, but it's ethical as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of on that train of thought about like the ethics of using down, what would I guess you say to some of those animal rights organizations or even like an individual consumer that aligns with being vegan and will outright not use any animal products? I mean, like, I guess you won't be able to convince them, but what would you say to them, I guess?
Yeah, and we never try to convince people, right? Everyone has a right to their opinion, and it's totally fine. I mean, we always distinguish between animal welfare organizations and animal rights organizations. So when a lot of these attacks first started, it actually was coming from an animal welfare organization that's based in Vienna called Four Paws, right? Like the four paws of an animal. And in the beginning, they were very kind of like militantly anti-down because they just thought there's no way to do it properly from an animal welfare standpoint. Over the years, through our discussions with them in dialogue, we've been able to show them that by the way that we're doing things, there really is a way to do it ethically. And we're, to my knowledge, the only down supplier that they've actually endorsed as a responsible down supplier due to all the work that we've done. And so when it's animal welfare, you can have a conversation showing that you're doing things in the best proper way to take care of the animals and all the product is a byproduct of the meat industry. When it's an animal rights organization like PETA that's purely vegan, there isn't much discussion to be had. I mean, that's kind of their opinion. They don't believe animal products should be used for anything. And I get that. I mean, what I would say to them is exactly what I mentioned before. Like, you could not use down. You can convince every brand in the world to not use down, but the down is still going to be there as a byproduct of the food industry. If you want people to stop using this product, you have to tell people to stop eating the meat, right? And convince people don't eat duck, don't eat goose, which here in the States is not that common anyways, but over in China, it's one of, it's a very main form of protein that they use there. And so that's why most of the down in the world comes from China, because that's where they eat the most of it. It's not, not something that they're manufacturing in a factory. It's coming from that supply chain. So that's kind of what I would say look, I understand that you don't believe animals should be farmed and raised, but then your conversation should be with the meat industry. It shouldn't be with the down industry. Telling a down company not to use down is just saying not to use something that's available and going to be there anyways, and instead to use something, like I said, that's petroleum based and synthetic. And even if you are using a recycled version, is still much more chemically and energy intensive than down. And so you're not really accomplishing anything by trying to get a brand to stop using down. If you want to, you got to talk to the meat people, basically. And so that's kind of the way that I would frame the conversation. But we always also do say, like, if you are a staunch vegan and you firmly believe that nothing should be used from an animal, then down probably isn't the product for you. What I will say is, interestingly, something that we've added over the last couple of years is recycled down. So down that comes from post-consumer products, right? So like I said, we're manufacturing a lot of bedding and things like that. And our partners obviously make a lot of down products. And so as products come back, we have the ability to take those products back, open them up, send the textiles out for separate recycling, and then reprocess the down to be used again, recycled. And so we're finding that we've had discussions over the last year or two with formerly vegan brands or vegan brands that will use recycled down because it's kind of one step further removed from the protein supply chain, so to speak, or the animal welfare supply chain. And And it's something where they can then justify using that material, which again is much more sustainable, even recycled, than any synthetic alternative. And so that would be something that's interesting. I think that, some of these brands that would never consider using animal products are okay to use recycled down, even if they won't use the virgin down.
Yeah, that is a really interesting distinction. And I really like the advice to like animal rights folks to be like, well, you should go after the source, like the number one thing that is contributing to, I guess, harm to animals would be the meat industry.
Yeah, I
And
mean, so I said it's kind of like, leather. We always make the analogy, right? Like they're never raising cows for their hides. It just wouldn't make sense. And so to stop brands from using leather, maybe there are other, I don't know all the processing kind of details for leather and how chemically or energy intensive that is, but it's the same kind of discussion. If you want people to stop using leather, you have to stop raising cows for meat, and then there won't be the leather, right?
absolutely. Yeah, and the recycled down is really interesting. Like I am a vegan and for a long time I didn't use like wool or down or anything like that, but the performance is kind of hard to compare, I guess, in the outdoor industry. And so I kind of started to go down that route, like as a consumer, be like, well, if it is used or like someone is getting rid of that product, or I thrifted it or something, then I was more willing to use it. So it's interesting to hear about the recycled down as like maybe an option that would align better with those viewpoints and like ethical standpoints for sure.
Yeah, that's exactly kind of the way we approach it. And I think it's a great way to look at it, right? Because it's not, you're in no way contributing to animal husbandry at that point, right? If that's something that you are against.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, I guess how can consumers then ensure that the down that they are getting from a company, because they're not obviously you're not selling it directly to the consumer, right? You're using it for your clients, and then the consumers are getting it from specific brands. So, if they're purchasing something like a down sleeping bag or a jacket or something like that, how can they ensure that it is as sustainable and ethically produced as possible?
Yeah, great question. So that's one of the things that I think that the RDS, the Responsible Down Standard, has helped so much with, right? Because it's a badge, so to speak, or however you want to whatever you want to call it, but it's something, a symbol that customers can look at and see that there's been thought put into that. So I would say that's a starting point. I wouldn't say that's kind of the end all, but I would say the starting point is to make sure that the down is certified to an animal welfare standard. Like I said, RDS is the largest one. And then beyond that, if a consumer really is discerning and really does care about the animal welfare, then look into it further. Make sure that the company is doing their due diligence. That's why we've started this Track My Down program, and we encourage our partners to use it so that the consumers can go and look at it. I mean, there are some negatives potentially to the supply chains, right? There's, for example, we don't source from that supply chain at all, but there's a foie gras supply chain where the, geese and ducks, specifically ducks in France and places like that are raised for the liver, and they're force fed in order to enlarge the liver so that people can eat foie gras. Right. So that's something that we don't do and take a lot of care for. So, I would just say it's important for the consumer to look into the brand that they're buying from and make sure that they're not supporting any of those practices, right? Because the less of that there is, the less issue there'll be. So just making sure that, that the information should be available. And if not, ask the questions. I mean, you can always email the brand. We get questions all the time through our either info@Allied Feather or info@Track My Down, just through the website, contact us and get questions about how things are sourced. And it's pretty interesting. We get like some good questions from consumers, just somebody buying a jacket and wanting to know certain things. And we try to be as transparent as possible. And so we actually enjoy that engagement with consumers and for sure with the brands. And we try to give them as many tools as possible. And that's why we try to make our site as transparent as possible, just to give them, to give as much information. When we first launched the program, maybe 6 years ago or so, our thought was maybe 7 at this point, but our thought was how many people are really going to take the time to go through this site and information about the down that's in their jacket. And you can even click on the test report, for how the down tested and see like the actual quality metrics and how the actual third-party lab tested it. We thought so. It's like, who's going to actually take the time to spend it? But surprisingly, we're seeing a lot of great engagement. We're seeing a lot of time spent on the site. We see about 80% done mobile on a mobile device as opposed to 20% on a desktop. And that tells us people are actually looking at it at point of purchase and using that to inform their decisions, which I think is cool. And we also find that the more brands talk about it, the more brands kind of highlight that to their customers, the more engagement that there is. And so it depends on the brand as well, right? Certain brands will talk about, those 10 things more, certain brands won't. And the best thing is, I would say 10 years or so ago, when we first launched all this, a lot of brands had the mentality like, I don't want to talk about it, just opens a can of worms. I don't want people thinking about, the birds, when they're buying a jacket. But I think through a lot of this work that we've done and giving that level of comfort to the brands and to the consumers, it's enabled brands to talk about it in a much more open way, in a much better way. And I think the consumers respond. And I think that we're seeing, some good engagement.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really interesting data to kind of look at and see how much people are kind of falling back and relying on that information. That's awesome. Yeah, so are there any other things that you wanted to add quickly here at the end?
Sure. Well, yeah, so just getting back to the expo dry that we've been promising. So, one of the things that were developed about 12 years ago or so, back in 2011 or 12, was water resistant down. And essentially that was a coating that went on the down. When we first started doing it, the industry was using like a C8 chemical coating that got banned. And we stopped using it before it got banned, but we went to a C6 and then transitioned to a C0 fluorocarbon-free water-resistant treatment back in 2017. So since then, our water-resistant down has been fluorocarbon-free and C0, and it's a paraffin-based coating, still a chemical that you're putting on the down. It coats the down, prevents it from getting wet. But it is a coating on the down. It can sometimes change some of the characteristics of the down. And so we started looking at a solution, and at the same time, in real world application, while it's nice and the down won't absorb the moisture, your down is never in direct contact with water, right? It's in a shell, either in a sleeping bag or in a jacket, and the water's never hitting it directly. And so what we were looking at is solutions for real world usage that can actually manage the moisture in the insulation chamber. And so we came up with, working with our partner Fuse Technologies, we came up with gold nanoparticles, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's literally gold taken and kind of obliterated, so to speak, by a laser process and turned into a solution, basically, which we can put on the down. The down just molecularly bonds permanently with the gold, with no chemical binder or anything like that. The amount of gold, used in like the down in a parka would be something like the equivalent of 2 to 3 grains of salt. So you're not talking about a huge amount, right? And gold, again, is a mineral metal. It's not a chemical, and it helps the down dry about 50% faster. And so where that's cool is like if you're skiing and sweating, and so that's where a lot of the moisture in down comes from. It's humidity. It's either ambient humidity or from the inside, both in a jacket or a sleeping bag. This will actually help the down, the gold molecules excite and help the hydrogen bonds in the water evaporate. So whereas, let's say with a water resistant down, sure, the down won't necessarily absorb the moisture, but the water can, or the moisture can be sitting in the insulation chamber. And that's why sometimes, on a really cold night, when you're sleeping in a sleeping bag, your sleeping bag will kind of ice a little bit. You'll still get like icicles in it because even if the down's not absorbing it, the water is sitting there and then the water is freezing. So this actually helps manage the moisture in the insulation chamber. It helps it actually evaporate it. And then also in the processing stage where we're applying it. So to apply the Expa-Dry versus the water resistant treatment, Expa-Dry uses far less water in the application and also less energy, because after the water resistant treatment is put on the down, it has to be cured at very high heat in a dryer. The Expa-Dry, because of the nature of the gold, actually requires less heat and about a third of the drying time to cure it. And so it really saves energy from the processing standpoint versus water resistant down. And then also at the home laundry standpoint, right? So once consumers are washing their jackets, one of the hardest things about caring for your down is washing it and drying it properly and thoroughly. And that was one of the other reasons we started doing development on this product. We were asked by one of our customers in Europe to develop a solution to dry the down faster, because a lot of consumers in Europe don't have heated tumble dryers. They have one unit where their laundry gets washed, and then the water drains and it kind of just spins without heat. And so for a down product without heat, and then it gets line dried. And so for a down product without heat, that can take a really long time to dry. And so we were looking into, a solution for this issue, and found that through this process, it's really interesting. The down dries, again, about 50% faster in a home laundry situation too. So saving energy, not only at the processing stage, but even at the care stage later on.
Yeah, that is really great. Sorry, this dog barked. That's why I jumped.
I know
Um, yeah, that's really cool. It's so interesting to hear about like all of those innovations and kind of like how they come about and arise, and like kind of how like the demand in the market can like influence some of those things. And that Allied Feather and Down seems to be kind of like pushing and like forcing some brands to kind of like enter more of that sustainable, ethical standpoint. So with that, how can listeners learn more about Allied Feather and Down and access some of your resources?
So we've created, actually just launched, like I would say 2 weeks ago, an info room at alliedfeather.com. So you can just go to our website, go to the info room, and we are still adding more and more information, as we go, because we just kind of launched that. But there's tons of information on there about all the things that we discussed, the sourcing and the processing, and the supply chain, the different technologies that we can apply, the different qualities that are available. Because like I said, it gets a little bit granular in that there's duck and goose and white and gray and different percentages of down to feather ratios, and then different fill powers, the loft that it takes up, and what all those metrics mean and how you get to them. And so, by going to, I would say the best way to start is going to our site, and then anyone can always reach out to us through the kind of contact us portal, and we're happy to engage in any way.
Awesome. I'll be sure to share the link to that in the show notes so people can access it easily. But with that, Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise and all of the cool innovations that Allied Feather and Down have brought to the outdoor industry.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book, on YouTube, or subscribe to our weekly newsletter at theoutdoorminimalist.com. For even more updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.